When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about the possibility of Daenerys not being the child of Aerys and Rhaella, but actually being the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna. Now, right away, you might be thinking, that's kind of a wild theory. Does it have evidence to back it up? Does it have much that makes it compelling? Right away, I'm going to tell you the answer is no, but it's an interesting thought process, right? Because we have this idea where Daenerys and Jon are born, it's said around 8 to 9 months apart. Jon is older than Daenerys. So the thing is, people like to say we have all these different type of baby swaps going on, or all these different people could be different. Here is my issue with a lot of this stuff. It's not that a lot of this stuff isn't feasible. Like, could it have been done? Like, could Daenerys possibly have actually been the child of Lyanna and Rhaegar? It's possible, right? Because this is a really big secret. No one really knows about what happens at the Tower of Joy outside of a handful of people. So, in reality, could it have been done? Yes. But the questions you should be asking is, why? Like, if Daenerys is Rhaegar's child, we have to go through this thought process of why would a number of people lie to her about it, or people around her not knowing about it. So, for instance, why would someone like Viserys lie to Daenerys that she is actually his sister, not his niece, but not actually being brother and sister? Like, it just doesn't make any sense when you think about it. Like, also put it from this point of view. When we look at, for instance, Jon, if Jon is the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna, the reason that they change like his identity, say that, oh, Ned fathered a bastard, is because it hides his Targaryen parentage. It makes him not a threat by somebody like Robert and all that stuff. With Daenerys, the thought process is that she is Rhaegar and Lyanna's child that for some reason became Rhaella and Aerys's child. What does that, like, how does that benefit you? The only thing I could think of that makes logical sense for why Daenerys, like, her whole origin would be changed is to maybe save Lyanna's, like, honor. Like, the idea that she didn't just run off with Rhaegar because she was in love with them and that caused a whole war, placing more of the blame on Rhaegar. But again, I'm kind of pushed back on that idea. I don't think that's enough to really say that this is correct. Like, I looked up evidence from, it seems like the main people that back this theory, and a lot of the evidence is kind of like not really concrete evidence or pointing to random moments and trying to tie that to Daenerys having Stark like blood. Like, there's, for instance, I've seen people say that when Daenerys sees this like vision of Rhaegar and saying to Aegon that he's the prince that was promised, and Rhaegar seems to look at her and say, there needs to be one more. Some people have said, well, that means Rhaegar is the father of Daenerys, but it's like, not really, right? That could just mean Daenerys is going to end up being one of these three heads, or even that Daenerys is the prince that was promised and Rhaegar was wrong. Or maybe Rhaegar wasn't wrong at all. Maybe he's talking about young Griff, and young Griff actually is Aegon, and Aegon is the prince that was promised, and Daenerys is going to be one of those three heads of the dragon. Maybe that's possible. We just don't really know. And so the evidence is just like, it's a lot of stuff like that. It's a lot of stuff that's like, you can interpret something a very certain particular way, but it doesn't actually back this. And you got to think the other part of this is, so you also have to remember Sir Willem Derry apparently would also have to go along with this lie for some reason. Once again, doesn't make any sense. You then have to ask, okay, so Rhaella, what happened to her? Did she have a stillborn and that caused her to die? Because if that is the case, Viserys and Daenerys' dynamic completely changes. We now view it very differently, whereas in the normal story, Viserys has a kind of a Cersei complex with Tyrion, where Viserys kind of looks at Daenerys as being the person that killed their mother. So there's a bit of that relationship, and that's what makes some of that relationship very complex. If you take that away, well, that's not the case at all. And maybe you can make the argument that Viserys would be thinking like, well, Daenerys represents the downfall of their house, right? In terms of Rhaegar running away with Lyanna, but that also doesn't seem to be factored into Viserys. Viserys doesn't really act that way, and that's the whole point of this that I just really struggle with, is that when you look at the idea of Rhaegar being the father, it doesn't make sense with the motivations of other characters. Because the theory then goes, I guess, if Daenerys is actually Rhaegar's, that she grew up in Dorne, and that kind of continues that plot, which, again, I just don't think would happen. The Martells were much too cautious to be harboring the Targaryens in Dorne. If they were discovered, they would be one kingdom against everybody else. So I just don't like this theory that much. I don't think there's really any evidence to suggest that Daenerys is Rhaegar's child. There's also dreams where, Dany's dreaming of actually being Rhaegar, being on the Trident. That doesn't mean that she is Rhaegar's child. A lot of the times, Daenerys views herself as being that next dragon, right? A lot of people look at Rhaegar as being the last dragon of House Targaryen. Daenerys is kind of fulfilling that role, and so she's compared to Rhaegar quite a lot. And so I think a lot of people take that as, oh, well, Rhaegar must be her father. Another thing then I would have to question is, we know that Daenerys gets to Dragonstone somehow. So the Tower of Joy happens, I guess, and then Ned and Howland Reed, or whoever, maybe Arthur Dayne in this theory, since we're pulling out all the wild cards, brings this child to Dragonstone. Okay. Again, this is after the Targaryens would have already fallen, because the Tower of Joy stuff happens after the sack of King's Landing. To bring her into further harm's way, just so then they can secretly escape Dragonstone and go to Essos or Dorne. Like, do you see how this plot doesn't really make a lot of sense? Because we have multiple people that account that Daenerys was born on Dragonstone. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, the motivations for the characters covering up Daenerys' birth, if she was Rhaegar's child, don't make sense. The actual plot itself doesn't make much sense with Daenerys being the child of Rhaegar. And so I kind of come to this idea of, like, why was this theory made? I think a lot of it comes with how suspicious Daenerys' like upbringing is, right? Her, forgotten memories and stuff like that, and the lemon tree, theory, all that stuff. And we go a little bit too far. I almost think people come up with this theory because they want Daenerys to be the person that's like the Song of Ice and Fire, having both the Stark and the Targaryen blood. And so they're almost forcing this theory to be true when there really is no evidence to suggest that it is the case. And, like, for instance, with Jon, there's a lot of evidence to suggest it in terms of Ned and his inner thoughts in book one. Whether it's the foreshadowing we get in terms of the comparisons with Lyanna to Jon, Lyanna's favorite flower, and that being at the wall. Like, there's a lot more evidence to suggest Jon could be Rhaegar and Lyanna's child. You then take a look at the Game of Thrones stuff, D&D, like, there's more there to suggest that Rhaegar and Lyanna had Jon, if they had a child, at all. Daenerys, there's just nothing. You're just basically you're just nitpicking certain quotes to fit a certain agenda that really don't fit at all. So let me know what you guys think. I'll probably get some pushback from this video because Daenerys fans can be very passionate, and I'm glad they're passionate, but I just don't really like this theory that much. I think it's one of the worst theories in the community. But let me know what you guys think. Did I miss something? I didn't really fully dive into this theory just because, just on the surface level, this theory kind of stinks. I like, you don't really need to go all that further into it to just question very basic things. And when you have to question very basic things in a theory, usually it's not a very good one. But I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.